Tell us what year this is from.
1995.
Oh, this is 95? Okay, great.
He's serving life for a cold-blooded killing. Tonight, a key witness recants his testimony. So will it affect the case of the Ninja murder? For the past 9 years, he has been serving time for a murder he claims he never committed. His appeals have been consistently denied. But that could change.
That's because Action News has learned key testimony was never given. And one witness now admits he lied on the stand. Channel 7's Bill Proctor is here with more of his close-up look at the case of the Ninja murder. Bill?
Came to be called the Ninja murder because of this man's prowess with the martial arts. But this killing was actually done with a shotgun. One of the inconsistencies as this tape started to develop. Fred Freeman had what appeared...
Okay, who's that on the screen right now?
Well,
that's Bill Proctor.
That's me, a little heavier. Many years ago, 1995. This journey for me started actually in 1993 when Temujin's right out of Central Casting investigator, Al Woodside, brought a huge box of documents to me and said, okay, you've got a lot of work to do, and you are the last reporter of dozens that I've tried to convince that this is a legitimate story. It is a horrible wrongful conviction. And once you get into these pages, you will understand that this could be the most egregious wrongful conviction ever in the country's history. And so that's where it all started for me with Al Woodside in 1993.
Wow. Should we keep playing the clip and then we'll go back to you?
Sure.
Appeared to be an ironclad alibi in this case. 19 people said they saw him and his girlfriend in the Upper Peninsula on the morning that college student Scott Macklem was murdered in Port Huron. Now, even 9 years later, some of those alibi witnesses who also watched the trial still can't believe that he was convicted for a crime they say he didn't commit.
I lost complete faith in the judicial system. I thought it was sort of a mockery of everything I always thought that the court system was about.
I can't believe they would keep anybody in with that kind of a trial. It wasn't really a trial, it was a show.
They both told the jury that murder suspect Frederick Freeman was in Escanaba on November 5th, 1986, too far away to murder Scott Macklem in the parking lot of the St. Clair Community College.
And just to clarify, his name is now Temujin Kensu. He changed his name, which we'll get into, but that's who Freeman is this person, the same person. Okay.
That's correct.
1986, too far away to murder Scott Macklem in the parking lot of the St. Clair Community College, over 400 miles away in Port Huron. But one of the prosecutors who tried the case insists that the right man is behind bars.
Fred Freeman shot Scott Macklem. Fred Freeman was found guilty of that, and he is guilty of that.
They focused in on him right from the start, and that's where they ended up.
Private investigator Al Woodside believes Freeman deserves a new trial because, among other things, the most important alibi witness, the 18-year-old pregnant girlfriend of Freeman at the time, Michelle Woodworth, never testified, never told the jury that she and Fred were together in this house in Rock, Michigan, the day of the murder, and were together all day in Escanaba, about 30 miles away from Rock, November 5th of 1986. Freeman says Michelle left town because she was intimidated by police investigators and...
Michelle does not like me very much. She believes that I'm going to challenge her for custody of our son. We do not have any kind of working friendship now, and she's always admitted that I was with her that day.
Michelle did not testify, but this man did.
He seemed like a decent dude, you know? He seemed like a guy that, you know, you could meet on a college campus or something, you know?
He's a small-time career criminal who wrote this letter to the prosecutor and then testified in Freeman's trial that Fred Freeman confessed to him while the two were in a holding cell in Port Huron. Now, terminally ill with a host of ailments, he admits the letter was fabricated, the confession and damaging testimony, all a lie.
You were talking about Mr. Freeman. It says the dude was telling me, yeah, he did it, but you'd never be able to prove it. Did Mr. Freeman ever really say that?
No. He said that he shot this guy with a shotgun. You know, prosecutor's office told me that when I made that statement to make sure that I turned towards the jury and looked at the jury.
But did Mr. Freeman ever say that to you?
No.
Did he ever say something about the victim screaming when he shot him?
No.
Did he ever say he used a shotgun to kill somebody?
No.
He says he was threatened when he wanted to back out of the testimony, but was rewarded when he did,
with a ticket out of Jackson Prison to a halfway house.
Taken out of the prison back to St. Clair County and never returned to Jackson Prison, and instead resentenced by the same judge that tried Mr. Freeman.
It was an insult, of course. Just think I was so stupid I would even do something like that. To spend all my time telling anybody who would listen that I'm innocent, and suddenly to come forward and say, oh, but I'll tell you that I did it, and plus I'll tell you details about it, and that was, that was very shocking.
The testimony of the phantom confession is just one of many shocking elements in this trial. Tomorrow, we'll hear from a juror who admits he voted to convict on speculation and not evidence, and the defense attorney whose drug problem has led to a new trial for another convicted man.
Wow. Okay. So anything you want to add to that? Then we'll, of course, jump to you, Joy, and then the three of us will talk. But such an insane story.
Well, the prosecutor that you saw in that story saying that he's confident that Fred Freeman used a shotgun to kill somebody was never able to tell me off camera how it is that so many people said that he was actually more than 400 snowy, icy miles away in winter and able to get from way up north to that coastal city of Port Huron to kill somebody. And no police officer I ever talked to said anything but Fred Freeman, Temujin Kensu, is the worst person on the planet. He has all kind of abusive behavior that we know of. And yeah, he did it. And that was the end of it. Not today, not ever have any of them said to me, this is how he managed to fool you. And that's what they kept telling me. You've been conned like everybody else, supposedly. But the ridiculous thing was the very impossibility of Mr. Freeman being able to convince so many people that either didn't really know him, only knew him from the karate studio, and some flat out didn't even like him. The bottom line is they were ready to take the stand under oath and say no. 2 hours, maybe 3 hours after the shotgun slaying in Port Huron, he was standing inside the studio chatting up some of us, and then went on to other places in Escanaba. And at no point has any cop ever been able to tell me how he did what they claim he did in court. It was, just as the witness said, it was a show. It was a show put on by a 6'5", 6'6", great voice, handsome prosecutor, and a guy who was not quite 6 feet tall, who was drug addicted, who was punchy half the time, who did a good job every now and then in the trial, but never good enough to deny the prosecutor what they wanted, which was somebody to lynch for the murder of that area's favorite son, Scott Macklin. It is horrific. And yes, the line of issues with this case is pretty long.
And Joy, how did you get involved in this story?
I read an article almost 5 years ago, and I was intrigued immediately because the title was something like man is 438 miles away in a blizzard, however, managed to commit murder. And I'm like, is that a typo? That makes no sense whatsoever. And I start looking into it, and I'm like, okay, there's 19 witnesses that say this guy was far away. End of case. What's the issue? So I started looking deeper into it. I reached out to Temujin, and immediately he granted me a prison interview. We talked on the phone, and after the first time we talked, I was like, I'm ride or die. Like, I'm going to fight for you. There's no way you did this. And there's a million reasons we know that. But it was, him as a person, he's a very kind, very thoughtful person, and just a very, very caring person. And he's not resentful. He's not mean. He's not brash. And it makes you want to help him more. So I interviewed him dozens of times from prison, and then that led to, personal phone calls a few times a week with him and his wife. And then 3 weeks ago, I flew out to Michigan to finally get to meet him in prison.
And we're actually going to play some excerpts of your interview with him. So do you want to set up how you were able to record this?
Trying to schedule a visit in the prison is, Bill, you may know, even phone calls and stuff, it's just, yeah. When you go to visit, it's even more, stringent. It took over a month to set it up. But on top of that, I am 85% blind. So I use a cane. I use prescription reader devices. I use accessibility devices, things like that. They don't allow any electronics. You can't bring a phone. You can't, there's nothing you can bring. Like, they don't even let you take a watch. So I'm freaking out because I'm like, how am I going to bring questions if I can't bring my reader or things like that? So I'm going back and forth for over a month. It's a prescription. Here's what it looks like. Here's what it's called, everything. Finally, they say I can bring my recorder, because I say the way I do it is I record things and I print out transcripts. Then I got there, and even though I had the warden's approval and everything, it took over a half an hour for me to finally get in. And I got in and I pressed record, and we were able to meet for over 4 hours. And so I have the only recording in that prison in his history. So yeah, and I was terrified that when I was leaving, they'd be like, no, you need to leave that with us, or you have to sign this saying you won't play it, and it's for transcript only. And they never said anything. So I have it.
So set up this clip that we're going to hear, because there's some names mentioned in it. It's like the names of some women. So just so people know who he's talking about.
Shelley is, Michelle Shelley is, was Temujin's 7-month pregnant girlfriend who he was living with at the time of the accusation.
So let's take a listen. And thank you, Brad, for making a little graphic to show while we listen to this audio.
Police ever interrogate you or give you any questions?
Nope. I am, to my knowledge, the only murder suspect in American history besides lynchings who wasn't sat down and interviewed by the police. They literally refused to interview me, and there's a police report that literally said Freeman called to complain, wanting to know why nobody will talk to him. Because they didn't want me on the record talking about any of this, or talking about Crystal, or, telling them, here's my alibi witnesses, go check this, go check that. Yeah.
Did they question Shelley?
Yep, and she told them I didn't do it, and they never talked to her again. They knew I was innocent. They knew Shelley wasn't lying. She was a scared kid. Plus, remember, they talked to Beth up north, which we didn't know. So Beth told them I was on a date with her in my broken down car the morning of the murders. They knew all along that I was innocent. This was not a mistake. It'd be fine if this was a mistake. This was not a mistake. This was planned from the beginning.
So Crystal is the woman who threw in Temujin's name, threw that in to the police. They didn't know who he was. She's the one that brought up his name. Beth is who he was with. He was out with Beth when the murder took place. And Shelley was who he lived with.
Crystal Merrill was the person who was dating, if not was the fiance of the shooting victim, Scott Macklin. Right. I say it in a somewhat nebulous fashion because theirs was an on and off relationship. And there is no question that Crystal Merrill was sleeping with Kensu, at least on 2 or 3 occasions, and then stalked him to the point where he and his pregnant girlfriend had to leave the area of Port Huron generally. And that's what put them up in Escanaba/Rock at the time. And they had been living up there for months before Scott Macklin was killed. So all of the claims by police that that Fred had a harem, that that Crystal was one of the women of his harem, and that he killed Scott Macklin because Scott had the unmitigated gall to take away one of his women, was just some of the incredible BS that the government threw at this case that had nothing to do with it at all. And of course, when Scott's body was found, they went straight to Crystal, who was upset, and her sister happened to be nearby for the interview. And she was the one that chimed in and convinced Crystal that the two of them, had to tell the police that if there was a suspect anywhere on the planet, it had to be Fred Freeman / Temujin Kensu. So that's how that took place. Of course, Michelle Woodworth, did eventually have the baby, but she literally was terrified by the police raid in Rock, Michigan, where they went to find Temujin. Of course, he wasn't there, but she was trying to tell them before they tore up the place and terrified her and the dogs that, look, he was here. And if you're talking about the November 5th, first thing in the morning, we were getting out of bed at about the time you say he was killing somebody all the way over on the other side of the state in Port Huron. They would not hear anything that made any sense about Fred's statements about his whereabouts, his intent, his history, all of it painted to somebody else. And to this day, I believe that the police actually know exactly who it was. And because that killer was, quote unquote, one of them, somewhere in one of their circles, that person was the contracted killer for Scott Macklem. And I think it had to do with Scott's involvement in illegal drug trade. I say I think because we have never been able to assemble it. And his own blood that I have held in my hands, the 4 vials in the police custody, has never been tested to determine if he even was a drug user, much less a drug dealer.